Jai Hind, everybody. We have just been in the pause phase of Operation Sindhu. Now, whether those 4 days were seen as the highest degree of intensity or something more will happen, that is matter of conjecture. This pause may terminate in the end, at least for the time being, or something new may erupt. So that is again a matter of conjecture. But this new age war actually has brought in multiple new dimensions. And we are really going to be lucky today to hear Gen Pannu on this very important subject. And it is going to enhance our professional knowledge in a substantial manner. Altogether, a new subject, and as to how the things are changing, how the adversaries are calibrating their responses or their planning. And probably he will be able to guide us, give a glimpse as to what all should be done by us to remain ahead of the adversary in the loop or the capability development matrix. So before taking much time, I will request Ashish to introduce the speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Lt Gen PJS Pannu, Ati Vishish Seva Medal, Param Vishish Seva Medal, Ati Vishish Seva Medal, Vishish Seva Medal, retired, is the former Deputy Chief of Integrated Defence Staff. The General Officer has vast experience of counter-insurgency and anti-terrorist operations in the state of Jammu and Kashmir and North Asia. Sir has been an alumni of the Defence Services Staff College, Wellington. He also has 2 MPhils from Army College, War College, and National Defence College, Delhi. He is currently pursuing his PhD on Indianization of defence industry for modernization of the armed forces. Sir has commanded a battalion and an infantry brigade in the Uri sector on the line of control. He has commanded an infantry division on the line of actual control with China and commanded 2. The general officers also served in 2 foreign missions under the United Nations in Mozambique and Sudan as the chief of operations in both the missions. Sir was responsible for the Tri-Service Doctrine, Organization and Training requirements. He was the chairman of the Executive Committee of the USI and, of course, CENJOWS. As Deputy Chief of Integrated Defence Staff Operation, he raised 3 premier defence agencies that includes Defence Space Agency, Defence Cyber Agency, and the Armed Forces Special Operations Division Special Operation. He is currently the FICCI chairperson of the Task Force for ICT Modernization for the Defence and the chairperson for the SATCOM Industry Association. He is a distinguished student in the USA. He has co-authored a book titled The Power of Future Machines and authored many publications on defense technology. He is the head of the military history and strategic vertical of the Valley of the Words and International Literature Fest Foundation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashok. Very happy to be back with CENJOWS. I have been associated, as Ashish mentioned. CENJOWS is also going from strength to strength, and I wish that CENJOWS contributes more to the war fighting and capability of the nation and bringing an understanding to the larger community in the country, because when you fight a war, and increasingly this word or this expression is being used, all of nation approach. And all of nation approach means that every citizen must understand the war the way the military understands the war. And how the citizen understands the war, the military must have an understanding of the expectations of the people that they have from the military on their personal security, on the community security and national security per se, not only within the confines of the boundary of India, but also when they travel abroad, they should feel secure as the citizens of India. A passport that they hold should also give them immense pride. So therefore, national security per se is a very, very large dimension. And therefore, when you talk about warfare, warfare is basically building a capability of the nation, which builds deterrence from the military perspective and respect from the acceptability perspective in the globe. If you have deterrence, then you achieve 2 things. You avoid war for the simple reason because the consequences of the war that would be communicated even before you get down to fighting would deter the enemy from attacking you or doing anything which is harmful for the national interest of the country. So therefore, most important thing for a nation is to A, avoid a war or win a war even before you start fighting a war. Therefore, there has to be a huge understanding on the capability building of the military, which is a wholesome capability of the nation. There are a number of organizations and number of institutions and number of border guarding, law and order forces which we have. But when we actually look at these numbers and put them together, India would willy-nilly be number one in having the boots on ground. It is not only the regular army I'm talking about. It is the border guarding forces, the CAPFs, who are all supposed to be, through the Act of Union of India and enshrined in the Union War Book, are supposed to be placed at the disposal of the military when they go for war. If you total the total military assets, including manpower and also of the number of weapons and trained forces that we have, we count towards the largest force that we can muster in the whole world. So therefore, new age of warfare, there are new, it means something which has not happened earlier. It is futuristic. When you talk about the age, it is related to what age are we talking about? We are talking about information age and we are talking about industrial age. And when you talk about warfare, it does not only count towards physical manifestation, which through violence becomes the means to achieve victory. So in the new age of warfare, we have to look at the contemporary situation of the world. And the mistake that often gets made is that we read history, which is good. We read what is happening elsewhere in the world, which is great. And we try to bring lessons out of what has happened in the past and what is happening now, and try to put those models into our concept of warfighting. But what needs to be understood is that are we in the same condition, same situation as the other countries were at that time, or we were in the past? And how does our geopolitics, our current economic strength, our political agenda, our political structure that we have, how are we organized to defend ourselves? So really speaking, one has to understand the geoeconomics, geopolitics, environment of where you are located. So, you know, everybody knows that you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors. So the first and foremost thing that the government of India started was the neighbor first policy. We've been talking about look west, look east, or whatever we've been looking. But when you are talking about the act east and act west and the neighbor first, it means, yes, we did have an intention of having the neighbors first, but did we avoid having a conflict with the neighbors is the first point that we need to understand. That if we have not been able to have enough statecraft and diplomacy to ensure that we either do not get attacked, we don't get threatened, or we do not have any opposition in any international fora from our neighborhood, it means we have done well and we have been able to achieve the objective of neighbor first. We have been able to achieve the objective of look east, look west, act east, act west. But if we have not been able to block the intentions which are adversarial in nature of the neighborhood, and the neighborhood turns hostile and adversarial, that is the first point in the new age warfare that we need to understand, that what did we do differently, and then what we should do in the future. But as we say, we cannot change our neighbors, we cannot change our situation, we can only go from here to the future. So that is all about the adversarial neighborhood. Second thing is that your own diaspora outside, or your ambassadors outside, they're hugely contributing to the image of India. Some of them are doing regular jobs, some of them doing service, and many of them are the CEOs running huge commercial establishments and largely technology-based companies they are running. You see the turnover of these companies are as big as the GDPs of many countries put together. So it means that Indian capability is there, and therefore the Indian capability contributes to the Indian might, and Indian might contributes to the deterrence. It means that you cannot mess around with this community because this community has the ability to do the business. This has international outlook. We have the technology. We have the best minds who can churn wealth. But how many of such like people are working inside India? So let's now come back into how we are doing our business within. Our structures have been such that we have limited resources in our country. And when you have limited resources in our country, at the base of being an agrarian society, we have to make sure that the baseline is strong enough to make sure that those who are doing their core professional agriculture are the ones who should be able to meet their requirements, and they have to settle themselves and be happy Indian citizens. That is first. Second thing is that the soldiers who come from various backgrounds, some of them are from rural background and some of them are not from rural. They are from small towns, maybe the C, B towns, and some of them are from Class A cities. If you really see the structure of how the military forces or institutions are built, you will find that large number of population which resides in Class A cities contribute to very little as far as the defense forces are concerned. But largely the contribution to the defense forces comes from Class B and Class A cities. And the huge base comes from the agrarian society that we have. These are the people who are actually brave because they brave the nature, they brave the uncertainties, they have to work physically, and they have to also work with machine because a lot of tools and implements and the machinery is also being used by them now. So therefore, the technology has started touching all the segments of society. And in future, there is a huge threat that as the machine takes over the responsibility from a human being, on one side, we have the population which is exploding. And on the other side, we have the machinery, which is exploiting the natural resources faster than the human capability to exploit those natural resources. The machine is exploiting the natural resources faster. It means that the consumerism has started. And because of consumerism, which has started, a lot of people are moving away from the hardcore military profession to going and doing certain things where more revenues come, faster revenues come. And therefore, businesses have started kicking in. And at some point, you find that the industry starts investing in various sectors on where the market forces allow them to invest. So over a period of time, you realize that India has not been investing much into building a military-industrial complex. And military-industrial complex has got a huge business angle, but a country which spends huge amount of monies in creating a defense budget to give salaries, to provide equipment, to modernize the armed forces, which in turn appears as if it is a burden because some other sectors earn the money and defense spends the money. So this becomes that the reduction of the defense budget to a point would mean that so much more money is now being spent for development of the nation in other sectors. But what needs to be seen in the new age is that if you build a military industrial complex and infuse the technology in building something which is international and which is more superior than anywhere else, so two things will happen. One is that you would modernize your armed forces to the best technologies, which would be homegrown, because you would have invested huge amount of money in the research and development. Huge amount of talent who are technically qualified would get into the services or into industrial businesses and making an industry which is more professional in nature to support the military. And we will produce the world-class military hardware, which we can export. And if you can earn revenue out of the exports that you do, that revenue will come back into our mainstream and also budget our defense forces. So it means the entire defense industry or defense complex should be economically so designed that we should be able to make huge amount of money to give our own defense forces the budgets that they require, and to pitch it simply at 2%, 1%, or 3% of the GDP, and desirable being 3%. That kind of a formula will certainly tilt, because I think 3% of the GDP, if you contribute more than 5% GDP through the military-industrial complex, well, it means you are giving 3% of GDP to your own forces, and yet you have 2% GDP for research and development for anything else. The advantage we are having here is that, as against in the past, where the military hardware could not have been put to civilian use. Today, as we are growing from analog to digital to autonomous, you find that a lot of dual use technologies have come. It means that if you're investing in space, if you're investing in cyber, if you're investing in automation, that AI and ML, you are talking about data crunching, and you're talking about huge amount of systems where we have networks running. You will need your banking systems, your critical infrastructure, all are based on the technologies that are going from digital to autonomous. But as we go from digital to autonomous, you find that there is also a risk of exposing these networks to somebody who can actually get into your networks. Earlier, you could lock a door, you could have a closed door meeting, you could lock in your cupboard a secret document. But if everything is going to be put on the networks, then you see the amount of interference and amount of manipulation which can happen to your own way of thinking, and somebody else can benefit it out of it, the whole thing, but also compromise your national security. So therefore, as we are growing into the networks, we have to make sure that the supply chain infection does not enter these networks. Now, what is supply chain infection? Supply chain infection is that if you're sitting on a computer and the computer is networked either through a terrestrial or a non-terrestrial network, it means whatever is on ground is terrestrial, whatever goes into space is non-terrestrial. Now, today, the space networks and the ground networks have become one monolith of networks. So if somebody finds the spot into one of the computers which are in a huge network, that can be used for taking out all the information, changing the entire information, and also instituting a cyber attack. So a lot of backdoors are available, a lot of bugs which can be infused into your systems are available. So therefore, cyber warfare becomes one of the most important new age tool of warfare. And cyber warfare, when you're talking about the cyber domain, is called the fifth frontier of warfare, where the first, second, and third being Army, Navy, Air Force, the land, the sea, and the air. These are the first three dimensions. The fourth dimension is the space. And the last dimension is the cyber. India entered into space very early, in 1960s. We got our independence in 1947. Within about a decade, we understood that we need to enter space. And once we started entering space, of course, a lot of foreign collaboration happened, and we designed our own satellite, Aryabhata, you're all aware of. But today, we have a huge amount of launch capability. We have launched a number of satellites, and today we have a number of satellites, anything about 60 satellites which have launched, which are there of our own, which is only 2.5% of the total number of satellites, and reducing as a share of number of satellites which are there in the world. So it means that if space is the center point of growth for national security and development, it means a huge amount of investment has to go into the space, where you have your own satellites looking at various points of interest from where either the harm can come to you, or you can reach out for anything for the purpose that I'm going to be talking about. So therefore, 2.5% and reducing, because you see the number of satellites the Chinese are sending out, the number of satellites which the Europeans, and the ultimate number of satellites which private satellites which are being thrown by the United States of America are so huge in number that our percentage share of number of satellites which are going to be available for all that the space can do is only reducing. So therefore, we need to really work very hard to make sure our space domain is not only understood, but also investment goes into it, a lot of industry goes into it. And therefore, how can we use space for warfare is another point that I'm going to be talking about. The space and the cyber put together have slowly started looking like one. In fact, satellites are flying computers. Satellites can also process data. We don't have too many satellites which are on edge computing. It means a lot of data gets analyzed there and processed, and then it is sent down, because the networks which send the data down to the Earth stations have a capacity which is limited in nature. So you cannot have a lot of garbage going up and garbage coming down, but processed data coming in would mean that it will be available to you for better decision making at a faster time frame. So the entire system in warfighting are looked at from 3 dimensions of space. First and foremost is that you must look at the areas of interest, and you have to look at where you can influence these places. So let's talk about warfare. I'm first going to be handling the space, and then I will handle the cyber, and then we will go back to how we should write our doctrine and how we should work towards preparing ourselves for the future warfare, because the contours in the neighborhood are also changing. The space per se is a God's eye. The Earth moves and the satellites move into an orbit. So there is a lot of movement which is happening in the space, and all this movement is related to the Earth. It means that any satellite which is into an orbit goes around the globe. The moment you launch a satellite, it goes into an orbit, it becomes more global in nature. It means it is not only restricted to staying above the Indian nation. It goes around. But this is more true for the low Earth orbit, which moves around much faster, and it is the closest to us. When you go into the medium Earth orbit, you are away, it can have a larger coverage, but in relation, the satellites in relative mode are slower. And when you throw a satellite at 35 to 36,000 kilometers, it literally becomes static because it matches with the rotation of the Earth. When it starts matching with the rotation of the Earth, it becomes geostationary. And when it becomes geostationary, it means there is something which is like a light in a room, which always is available to you in this room. So that satellite is always in that part of the globe. So if you have 3 geostationary satellites that can cover the entire globe, this is the overlap. When you come down, you come to the medium Earth orbit, which is anything between, say, 2,000 to 30,000. You're calling it 36,000. These are medium Earth orbit. They are basically, in the past, they have been using for something which I will talk about is PNT, and we will talk about PNT a little later. And as you come down, the low Earth orbit is closest to the Earth. It means you are having a look at the Earth from the most proximate destination. But it moves so fast that it can see better, but the speed itself becomes a liability. So therefore, it covers the area in a manner that being very close, the swath, that is the radius, which it sees is very small. As it goes up, the radius becomes bigger. As it goes very high, the radius becomes even bigger.
So when you bring down, it sees a very narrow portion of the Earth and moves very fast. So you have to put many number of satellites, more number of satellites on the low Earth orbit, which is becoming a challenge. Elon Musk, China, all of them are hugely choking this entire low Earth orbit because they are using now the
same satellites for communications and for the broadband. Earlier, as we thought in our belief system that we have to have a geostationary satellite for our communication because it's always there. How can a moving satellite, which is only available to you for a couple of seconds, or a couple of minutes, or a couple of, say less than an hour, or not even say sometimes 20 minutes or so, how can they communicate? Because they're moving. So you can have a receiver which is also transmitting, and then it is not available to you. So then they have started going for formations, clusters, like you have the swarm technology. So you have number of satellites, and any satellite which goes, then they create a web. When they create a web, they go around. It means that the entire web of the satellites is giving you a broadband. And these are the satellites which were actually handed over by Elon Musk to Ukraine for communications. And they're very small terminals, and those terminals can also be carried man-packed. And the Russians were quite baffled that Russia, which is a pioneer in the space sector, all of a sudden found that the Ukrainians could match them. And they could have huge amount of communication advantage and also the Earth observation, because after all, whatever is being seen from wherever it is being seen has to be communicated to the terminals on ground. So inter-satellite links are the ones which get configured that from wherever you are in the GEO, MEO, or LEO, it can, through the inter-satellite links, can be brought down and to be made usable to the ground. Very small,
vehicle mounted, and it can also be huge. They can be used for headquarters which are bigger in size. Space has been a legacy technology. When the space started, the technology did not understand cyber. The cyber, the fifth frontier, came in later. And whatever communications were being the method of communication which was being used earlier, because space is an older technology and cyber is a new technology, the cyber has started challenging the space. So therefore, the exposure to networks, and as I talked about supply chain infections, that if anybody gets into your system, can manipulate your system, the space has to very quickly go to the younger brother, that is the fifth domain, and tell them that, look, let's become a monolith. So therefore, I'm calling it a cyber shield, that you have to have a protection. Again, coming back to space. Now, there are three things which are being used. One is that Earth observation can be EO, electro-optical. It can be SAR, it is synthetic aperture radars, and it can be also electronic intelligence. All the electronic gadgets, they are turning out a lot of radiation. So therefore, all that
also starts getting captured, and they also form a format which you can study as to where all there are terminals and where there is equipment which is actually radiating any beams, any communication wavelengths. So all that can also be seen from the satellite, from the electronic intelligence. And if they can be seen, they can be interfered. So therefore, the cyber attacks, not only to the critical infrastructure, which is your power grid, which is your airline, which is your anything, industrial systems which are on networks, anything can be attacked at any time. So that becomes one of the major issues where you talk about the new age warfare. So the space and the cyber have enabled the networks to empower, but also they have become very vulnerable. Because they have become vulnerable, so now warfare comes in. That the moment you're vulnerable, you will be attacked. If you are attacked, you can completely be demolished. Your banking systems can be choked, your railway systems can be choked, your airlines can be choked, your power grids can be choked, all this can be choked. Now, all that being spoken now come back to the first three: Army, Navy, Air Force. Land warfare, where through years in the modern warfare, the First World War, the Second World War, and of course many wars in between, but of late in our memory of the current generation is the Gulf Wars. First Gulf War and the Second Gulf War was the first time when the whole world watched the war together. Earlier, there was no information available. Right, it is somewhere else. We don't know. Somebody more aware would maybe give it out in a broadcast in the radio, and you have to have a radio. You can't see anything. The first war which was televised was the first Gulf War. It was not only televised; it was also used by the military-industrial complex to advertise the capability of the industry, which were marketing their own product to be sold elsewhere in the world. So therefore, the industrial military complex or military industrial complex became the business of warfare. So warfare of business and business of warfare actually start riding together. It means number of people who want to sell you arms ammunition, smart ammunition, missiles, tanks, aircraft, all put together become the modes who are actually your war managers. They are the ones who are actually managing the conflicts because it is the money which manages. So business of warfare actually has become one very major issue in the world. The second thing is the regular soldiers versus the private military companies. You would have heard about the private military companies where you hire soldiers, where you can hire soldiers which are like regular armies being put on hire, which are not individual mercenaries. Pakistan has always earmarked a division which can actually get deployed, and they have been deploying a division in Saudi Arabia. Pakistan and Bangladesh has also sometimes come out with this model that we will have a division, you please give us money, you can pick up our division and take it elsewhere. But most of this arrangement Pakistan made was as a mercenary force to be deployed elsewhere. Once you become mercenary in nature, then you are funded for it. When you're funded for it, then the standards that the mercenary organized force would be the requirement to modernize and requirement to be equipped to the international standards. I think a lot that has been missed is that a mercenary regular army gets equipped by those people who want to use it and the money flows in. And therefore, over a period of time, you find some monies have come in, and how can a country which is struggling to feed the three needs build a nuclear bomb? How can those countries who cannot afford to send their children to school have a military which is modern? It is the geopolitics of Pakistan, where the whole world used this as a firm base. Now the Chinese are using it as a firm base, as a transit route to the Indian Ocean through the Gwadar, which they have developed as a port. So therefore, Pakistan has been of better usage to the whole world than India has been, for two reasons. One is India as a peninsula. You can only use the ports of India, but you can use the land of Pakistan. Because Pakistan was used as a firm base to stall the great game expansion of Russia down towards Khorasan, as you call it, Afghanistan and Iran. So therefore, to stall the growth of Russia, a lot of Western interests came into Pakistan, that is the geography of Pakistan. And once the Afghanis became more independent, because they also got access to modern warfare and technology, and you said the modern versus modern, the other modern had to move out. The Taliban has also picked up very latest arms and ammunition from them. And then the number of casualties on the Western militaries was such that they could not withstand. So they have moved out, and now the Chinese have come in. And Chinese are not only using it as a safe corridor or a corridor for economic purposes, but it's also a corridor for military purposes. So therefore, when you talk about POK, you talk about Gilgit-Baltistan, or you talk about Excision. It is not the ego of a nation. It is the usage of that land which China and Pakistan have together started using. So it means we are asking them to give us some land which is their firm base, which is now being put to military use. So therefore, it is not the emotional, historical connect or claim of the area. It is now how the current areas are being used by the two nations for their own economic and military purposes. I think that is not what we should lose sight of. So therefore, this is as far as land is concerned. As far as Navy is concerned, we have got a huge coastline. We have got a capability of building the infrastructure for Navy, and secondly, trade and commerce for merchant shipping. We are dominating Indian Ocean, and Indian Ocean is one ocean where on both sides there are choke points. In the east, we have the Malacca, and then this side we have, the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. If the Indian Ocean is dominated by India, then it becomes a pain point for anybody else who has to transit through in case India has a powerful navy. So therefore, after having spoken about the land, I'm speaking about how the other nations, such as the Americans and the Chinese or the Russians, getting very sensitive to what India does in this. So as I was saying that they are firm bases and military bases in Exaichen and Gilgit-Baltistan, here I'm talking about all the bases which are being put together in a very geostrategic interest are all in the Indian Ocean. And the third thing is the air. When you talk about air can dominate the seas and air can dominate the land both. So they are as important in both these planes. So air will be put to use to support the land operations or the maritime operations. Now, having said all that, there is a huge cost of body bags. Would you fight a war where body bags are coming home? No, because people don't send their children to the army. There's a lot of more opportunities coming up for the youngsters. Would they want to send somebody who's highly educated and very promising for the benefit of their own family, go and fight and die, and maybe you will get some respect and few salutes and a little bit of honor here and there? No. So therefore, the body bag sensitivity not only was in Europe or in United States, it has also become in China post one child policies that they've had. How can you have one child, one son going and fighting elsewhere? So they said, okay, let's buy time, let's modernize, let's invest hugely in which we don't have to expose a Chinese young boy to a bullet. So therefore, give them more technology and enable them in high altitude, enable them for the ocean, and enable them everywhere else. That became not only a necessity of growing economically, but they are the ones who actually use the military industrial complex and military business to earn money to empower the military forces. So therefore, they have been able to spare budgets for them because they have huge amount of exports, which are military exports. So I think we have to learn, some mirror learning has to be done as to what somebody else has done. On the contrary, the Soviet Union was made bankrupt because over investment in military. The geopolitics was created in a manner that all the Central Asian republics now, which were earlier part of the Soviet Union, moved away, because that is how the geopolitics is there. It means winning a war without fighting. How could two superpowers fight a war? Two superpowers don't fight a war. So they have to use technology and they have to use strategy to make sure they fight a war, win a war without fighting. That is an example of how you make another country completely bankrupt. And today we have Russia, which has risen from the ashes to wherever they are today. And we have right in front of us how again they are being brought back into becoming more bankrupt through first thrusting a war, and whether who thrust war on who, because information warfare is this most important part in the whole thing, is put a perception on the face of a country. Use that perception to blame the country. To blame the country and create an excuse to fight a war. So you have to create an event. So the moment you create an event around that, you can build a war. So to make the other person look guilty, you have to put the entire guilt on somebody else. Then you take draw the nation into war. You draw the nation into war, do not allow the nation to move out of war, and completely make them get sucked in when the budgets are not coming from the military industrial complex, the budgets are coming from somewhere else. If the budgets are coming from somewhere else, it will completely choke the growth of a nation, because your budgets that start moving from the productive utilization to a fighting economy. And once you're into fighting economy, over a period of time, you bleed and bleed, your economy bleeds, and the other nation cannot afford to fight a war. And that is where the knees are of a nation brought down to a point of bankruptcy. And then you say, here we are. And that is what we are seeing now globally. Coming to India, I think a lot has been said in which you can now put all these bullet points as to what should be the new age war fighting that India should adopt. I also spoke about the non-contact and non-kinetic use. But what we saw in Sindoor was non-contact but kinetic. I would say Sindoor is a benchmark, but it is not an example how the war is going to be fought. This is a default setting of how we landed up fighting a battle. If we were to fight a battle with deliberation, you can go non-kinetic and yet bring all the networks down, because everything is on a technology. So therefore, the investments have to go into a place where you are targeting the critical military infrastructure without any kinetic use. So therefore, as we used to have the aerial campaign followed by a land campaign, but today it has to be the cyber campaign. And then you can go into a non-contact kinetic campaign. And then subsequently, if still there is more to be done, then you can go into capturing of certain critical real estate if possible. But today, if you can and you should, and you are intending to capture the real military or the real estate, then there is enough strategy, political, geopolitical, have everything to make sure that you retain the territory. And therefore, enough reasons and enough proof needs to be given as to why you have captured a part of the territory and why you must retain it. Take your mind back to Eastern Ukraine. That the Russians on their own have started moving into an area which they felt is a Russian-held area. And therefore, first you put the perception that this area belongs to us and is now in the wrong hands and we must take it back. But I think they very quickly started changing the whole thing to bring the government down, to start attacking the other critical infrastructure, which is not in the area that they were trying to put a perception of claim. So therefore, before you write any campaign, you have to justify your campaign. And then you have to run the perception on that campaign. And perception of the campaign is whole of nation approach. It means if there are, say, 380 television channels, if there are some 3,000 odd digital channels, and there are some millions of newspapers which are churning out. Imagine if there are about 200 or 300 only news channels, and how many people are sitting and talking on that. How much data or how much whole of nation is speaking, which is building a data. And if those people are not integrated into the national way of thinking, you will find a lot of loose information which is being fed into a system, and that loose information would actually create a perception as to what a nation is actually saying. So nation is saying a lot of things, but how can you make people say what you want people to say, unless whole of nation is designed from the grassroots level of a training. We have to be trained together, we have to work together, we have to network together, we have to have our own technologies got to be given to our own people. So there has to be a patriotism, which is the grassroots of whole of nation approach. If we have not woven the nation together as one monolith, then we can't just loosely use whole of nation approach, whole of nation approach, but we need to bring that fabric of oneness together. And that is where it is extremely important that the spider web kind of things be prevented, that you can't have somebody who's infiltrated thousands of kilometers inside the Russian territory when drones have all of a sudden unleashed an attack. It means if that nation was woven together, nobody could have penetrated the nation physically inside. Now, this is not the critical infrastructure or the cyber attack that I'm talking. Here, I'm talking about
of autonomous and a physical penetration into the system. So I think more I speak about it, more we will understand that we need to do 3-4 things correctly. When you go for building your industry, or when you want to procure something, a hardware or anything which is going to enable to modernize the forces, we need to decide on 3 or 4 things. A, what is our overall philosophy of war fighting? Are we into deterrence? Are we into war avoidance? Or are we into a conflict termination at our point of choosing? And if we go into a war, then what is the exit strategy that we have here? You can't keep going 1 year, 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year, like the Russians are going. I really wonder if they have an exit strategy. As far as Israel is concerned, what is Gaza? Gaza is a very small, it's like some people own farms of that size is Gaza. And there is one nation which is having a class A military, hugely technologically empowered, still hammering them out and getting the 2nd year. They go into 3rd year also probably. So the point is that what is the war stamina? If war stamina in Russia or war stamina in Ukraine was built for years and years together, then they would have actually written those doctrines. So what is our doctrine and what is our war stamina that we have built? It needs to be configured into the doctrines. And if the war stamina that we need to build is not very predictable, then we need to have enough industrial capability that on the go, the war stamina goes into an enhancement of how you want to continue to empower not only your skilled manpower of forces, but also how you reconfigure and bring the border guarding forces, other forces put together and churn more and more manpower should boots on ground men. Similarly, if it is ammunition or if it is something which is attrition to be replaced, all that needs to be worked out and you build war stamina. So therefore, all that I'm saying is needs to be thought. You can't just say, okay, I will use drones. But did you have a concept of usage of drones? Did you have a drone doctrine? Do you have your military formations in which people are trained to use drones? Do you have industrial capability and technology which will give those drones, which will get expanded and you will on the go continue to empower them? Have we built the war stamina in which we not only reconfigure the drones or autonomous systems and to how we are learning while fighting a battle and we reconfigure? This is what Israel does. Israel constantly reinvents itself on any lesson learned, and you can't say, hey, listen, I got it from here, that failed, but now I don't know what to do because I don't have anything, and so I have to now, earlier he gave it to me, then I say, can you give it to me? He gives you to something, that doesn't work very well. Then you have to make sure that the technology is owned by us. If technology has to be owned by us, we need to have our own chip manufacturing, we have to have our own programming, we have to have enough specialization to build a command and control element so that we have a shot. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.